Yes, let's give a warm welcome to Joachim, who's on stage with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, Joachim, what studio, which studio are you from, basically? Tell us a little bit about why.
I'm from the studio The Fully Arcade. We have been around for about 5 years, and we released our first game last year in October, and now we are in our working on our second title, which will be shown a little bit in the background here, and are at Nordic game and have starting to talk about it and showing the early prototype. As you can see here, the game is called Somn, and we are hoping to have it ready to be sent out for publisher testing in about, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks. So this is a film that are, I would say, probably 1.5, 2 weeks old now. So it's more populated. It's more, the game mechanics are more tighter. But we wanted to be early to show where the progress is.
Yeah, because I did some digging on the internet and I couldn't really found anything of it yet. So, what is this very beautiful artistic game about?
So in this game, we say that there is a place beyond human consciousness where you can get access to by dream travel, but very few humans have been able to do it, and very few remembers it if they're even at this place. And there are native people living here, and these they are like the source of the legend of the Sandman. So they are taking care of this beautiful place that they're living in, and they are taking care of what they see as sleeping spirits as they create dreams for them, more like a gardener that are watering flowers. And you play as this character called Blaze, and he's a native of the Dreamlands, and he discovers that something is wrong. Strange creatures have breached a legendary gate of Nefertiti, and he has to solve that mystery and also close the gate.
So how did you come up with this kind of setup? Is there do you have a special interest in dreams or dream worlds? So how was the process going with that?
No, it's has always been a discussion within the team, and we just push different kinds of concepts. And Dream was pretty early in that idea of the next title and how to work with it. At first, we dive in more of the classical dreaming and the psychology behind it. But then the more we discussed it, we realized that we wanted to create more of a fantasy world within human consciousness. And we lean back a lot to the idea of H.P. Lovecraft way of viewing dream worlds, that's something that you actually can become a physical place that everyone can access to, but it's just very, very hard. And our lead artist, Kalle Jonsson, he had a very strong vision of how he wanted to push it and how he wanted this to be represented. So we went with that and just loving the progress of it.
Yeah, this is not your first game, right? You did a game before called Arcade Sundown, basically.
Yeah.
Which is totally different from this one, right? It's a multiplayer game. It's very actiony, very comic-y. So how did you so it's also, this one will be a single player game, right? So why did you decide to make a game that's basically in style and gameplay very different from what you've done before? Is that a risk for you, or is it more okay, let's have something else, let's not do the same thing all the time, basically?
I think that everyone at the Fully Arcade, we want our studio to do novelty concept, and we want the core mechanics to be different. We don't want to do the first thing that pops up in our heads. Since we have a lot of us have a background from like the tech industry, doing some form of animation, and we are drawn to games because it's an extremely hard project and product to produce. So I think it's the challenge of always changing. And so we've done one type of game with one kind of mechanics and one type of gameplay and one kind of lore to it. So now we're more like, okay, we have done that. Let's see what's next, and let's twist it up. Let's do something different and keep it fun.
So you also, now we see see in the trailer, now we have the puzzles. So the game consists of 3 different game pillars. Would you like to elaborate on those?
Yeah, so we have the 3 pillars of it. It's stealth, where you can sneak around different kinds of nightmare creatures. And we have, for example, what we see on the screen right now, it's puzzles. And we want it to be environmental puzzle. It's a way for us to getting to know the world by creating these puzzle, and you interact with them. And also that we want to tie in a lot to the gardener idea of this dreamscape. And then we have also combat part of it, but we will see examples of it in like a minute or two in the video, but we didn't want it to be violent and gory. We want even that part to be a little bit dreamy. So we're working on getting the combat feedback feel very dreamlike.
Yeah, because you mentioned yesterday that pushing them off the, what do we call it? Yeah, the landscape is a pretty big deal about it.
Yeah, so we landed in, this is the second puzzle. I can just talk about it. This is also like you activating the flowers to be able to progress in the game. But we're also talking about using the dreams both as a combat skill, but also something to unlocking the world. Since he is a Sandman, and create dreams that can activate the world. Here's a good example of combat. Yeah, so what we want right now, it looks like there's explosion, but what we're aiming to do is that the dreams that you create repel the nightmares. So it's a way to feel more secure, but also if, like the combination of it, that if you would hit them with the dream, they will go back into becoming their essence, which is dream sand. So we want to work with like fluently colors and animation and make it pop really. And this is a good example of what we want to do with the landscape. Like here is gray boxing, and before we were in a meadow field, so we want a lot of flowers and working with the landscape and make it feel like a place that you want to stay in. And here's a good example of what you were asking about, was that you use the repellent to push them off the cliff, because the dream that you create are, in a sense, so beautiful that the nightmare creatures don't want to touch it.
So you arrived at those 3 pillars now after about 10 months, I think you said. So what was the process like for getting there, basically? Were there like other core mechanics that you were like considering but not doing in the end, or not like considering anymore, basically? Have you like had a lot like brainstorming sessions, and how did you decide in the end what the core of the game is going to be?
So we started with a more RPG sense of it and tried out like, how do we craft bombs, and try different ways. And we are pretty pragmatic. With everything that we test, we have different kinds of layers of testing. So we try out with like close people in the beginning, because we can't show it to that many, and just try to read them and see what works, what doesn't work, how do we push that thing further. And so we had a lot of different kind of game mechanics that we tried out, and yeah, we just keep on following that thread of what keeping people engaged, what people seems to enjoy playing. So it's a very pragmatic way of working with. I think game is very binary in that sense that this won't keep players engaged, so it doesn't work. We have to go back and do something else.
And now we also saw the book spirit that's kind of like explodes and also pushes away. But there are also other spirits, and they are. You told me yesterday that they were like more like glass textured. So, can you elaborate a little bit more about like what the spirit's role together with Blaze is?
So in this world, it's from his perspective, from the Sandman's perspective of this world, these strange creatures are starting to invading your homeland or your plane of existence, but you don't really know anything about everything outside. And within with these kind of strange creatures, other character comes in, which is humans, and they are lucid dreamers that have found their way in your world. So from your perspective, they are invading, but they are necessarily bad or they are not good. They are just humans that wants to escape our world because they don't feel welcome or they don't have a good time in our world. So they just find a new existence here, and they do what humans do when they come to a place. They exploit it.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because the person we are going to interview right after you is going to be Mateusz from Scriptwelder, and in his game he's also like dealing with the topic of lucid dreaming. So we really have like the dream block now with our interviews. Also, I very much like the idea of like the humans coming to this world because they are enjoying it. So they don't come with like bad intentions, but they really hurt this world. I just recently had heard of a quote from like a director who said the script is good when you like can understand every character's perspective, basically. So it's not like pure black and white, evil and good, but it's really like, okay, I see why those people are doing it. So is this an approach you like or you typically go with when you're like making games or creating stories?
I think that everyone that are in the group that writes the story have a way of loading everything with purpose and meaning, because unless the story doesn't engage us, we can't really tell it from a good way. So I think that we need to feel that it means something, and it's not just finding a theme that works. We want to feel engaged ourselves. We want it to feel important. So I think that's the approach. We will have to find that meaning. Otherwise, we're not going to be. For us, the character has to mean something. They have to carry some form of importance, and I think that's a very good way of approaching it. If we starting to loving the characters and feel for them, then we have to make choices for them that like pushes the story forward.
Yeah.
So now that we like before saw the, in my opinion, amazing artwork of this world. We talked a little about how you also created it with a combination of 2D and 3D as well. I find it very interesting because it gives the whole world a very unique look to it. Now we see the trees also over here and the bushes. What was the idea about mixing 2D and 3D in this way?
Yeah, since the game has a very fixed camera perspective, we've been just playing around in Unity of finding a good visual for it. And the trees, we didn't want them to be 3D because it didn't give the right feel to it. But when we just did like plain 2D asset, it didn't give us that right tone either. So what we found out is that if we built every 2D tree in a certain kinds of layers and have them in the front, that gives a very 3D perspective, and then you can like starting working with the asset in a way that really gives the game depth, and it's almost like it fools the eye because you have the rocks and you have other parts of it, the characters that are in 3D, and that like helps binding everything together, and makes it looks beautiful. The gray boxing, we need to do that. We need to work on that. But yeah, so but also when we populate with the flowers in the meadows, it also like give a certain depth that we don't have to put everything in a perfect perspective and a perfect height, because the fixed perspective from the camera angles gives everything a pretty good parallax.
So from a business perspective, the Fully Arcade is also part of like a larger group, right? It's the Fully group. Could you tell us a little bit more about how this works, how the structure of the company is based, and what the role of the Fully Arcade in this kind of structure is, basically?
So the Fully group is about 12 years old. When we started, we started with working with ad campaigns, digital, and then we have evolved within that and becoming a tech company. And very early on, we had an animation offer and film offer. So we tried to combine that and say that we are working with motion on the web, and we're trying to find the best marriage between animation and code. And the more we dive into that idea, we realize that we can't evade games because that's the perfect marriage. So we saw that, okay, in the near future, we have to start develop game if we want to keep ourselves true to that promise. So it was born out of that. And the bigger the company in itself have become, we wanted it to like become individual companies to be best at what it does. So the Fully Arcade is born out of that marriage, and then we have a animation studio that was born out of that as well. So we have one tech company and we have an animation company, and also the Fully Arcade that works with these kind of games. But within that structure, we also have our sibling, which is Wishfully, that produces Planet of Lana.
I think it's a really clever way of like setting up a company, or like several focus points, basically, because I would assume it gives you a lot of safety when it comes to finances and stuff like that. You're not as dependent on like having a company that gives you money for 1, 2, 3 years maybe to develop your game, but you have like more like a safety net with other things around it. So it's really, I think that's really great. Security.
Yes. You mentioned that this process has been going on for like 10 months. And we also talked about that in 2 weeks or so, the first prototype will be out there somehow. What is the plans for the prototype when it's done?
The prototype will initially be sent out to publishers for them to playtest, and it's gonna be we're hoping to have a small story from beginning to end that just open up the world more, gives you a hint of what will come of it, but it will feel like a small story within the big story. We don't think that it won't be fully, since it's a prototype, it won't be fully populated, but it will give enough to show where we're aiming. It's going to maybe be 60% there from the vision.
So what are your next steps, basically? So now you have like the early prototype. So where would this game go if everything falls into place, if you can acquire a publisher? So what is your vision, basically, for where this game should end up?
We're hoping to have, if everything falls into place and we have a publisher that wants to work with us, we're hoping to have about 20 months of production on it, and then we're aiming for a release on all the platforms. That was something that we have with us when we're going into this, and we're hoping that there will also that we can onboard the rest of the team members that we want to have within that core. But even though we wouldn't land a publisher next week or in 3 weeks or 6 months, we will still continue working on the game. As you mentioned, we have that infrastructure within the company that we don't have to find a publisher now, but we want to start a discussion, and that helps us to be a strong company to work with. We want to work with a publisher from a strategic standpoint, not necessarily from only economics of it.
So we already mentioned that this is not your first game. So have you taken any learnings from Arcade Sundown during the development process over here to this game, where maybe, so perhaps you can tell us if there are any things that you learned during the last game that made the development or like the first steps for this game easier, or yeah.
I would say that structure has been something that we like bring into this. Like we realized that the need of a strong producer and having like working with milestones and sprint planning helps so much, and being very open within the project of what we should do and what we're aiming to do for like these upcoming 2 weeks, for instance. But also when it comes to like building the game and it's that we try to work a lot more with answering our own questions. For instance, that we don't want to leave anything out, like a question about, oh, we can solve this later. So we're planning a lot ahead right now. So we have a lot of answers that we can't show in the prototype. For instance, like the story is more evolved than we can tell in the prototype, but we need it fixed in place for when we go into production. So I think that's something that we're bringing into this project from last time, that we have more things done before we going into the production phase of the game.
Yeah, and speaking of more things done and also storyline, so I love sound, definitely. Will there be dialogue for Blaze, and will he be voice acted? I have several questions here. Will there be more nightmares, and will there be bosses?
Yes, on all. We different kinds of nightmares we're trying to implement. The prototype will have, I think, 2 types of nightmares, and also 1 lucid dreamer. And we want the story needs to be told in a certain way, because it's this kind of game, so we can't really avoid finding another way of working with it without voice actors. So what we are aiming to do now is like sketch up like how they could sound, but there will be like dialogue within the game, and we lean a lot to Hades to that, how they work with dialogue and how like the general feel of the dialogue and the tone of voice. So we're trying to find that way forward, not necessarily in exactly the same way, but we find a lot of inspiration on how the structure of dialogue work.
All right, we are slowly wrapping things up right now, so we are going to go to the next or last question, the question we asked every developer on stage so far. So at the moment, it's not a very nice time for the games industry, basically. There have been layoffs, there have been studio closing. It's really hard to like acquire financing. Nevertheless, we have like several rooms full of game developers who are like very eager to make more games. So what is it specifically for you that like drives you forward, that motivates you to make games? Is there something that gives you hope or that inspires you basically to work in this field, even if it's not that easy at the moment?
No matter what kind of product I look on, if it's a comic or it's a film or animation, I've never found anything that is both that hard to work with and so stimulating. And game is truly one of the most like creative way of expressing yourself. So I mean, if you enjoy creating games, just stick around. But because like bad times will change, everything changes all the time. So I just keep your head. What do you say? Keep yourself calm, and this too shall pass.
Right. Yeah. Thanks so much. So if any people want to like play the prototype or get in touch with you, how can they reach you? Basically, that's
through our webpage, thefullyarcade.com. There's email addresses. Contact me there. Otherwise, we're on all social media. Just add us there, and we will do our best to answer. We also have a Discord, so we exist everywhere.
All right. Thanks so much, Joachim. Please give Joachim a nice round of applause. Thanks for answering all our questions. Good luck with your game, obviously, and yeah, have a nice time at like Nordic Game.